Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this rule and to the underlying legislation. I rise in opposition not just because an important amendment that I offered, along with Representatives Conyers, Paul, Nadler, Tom Udall, and Eshoo, was not accepted by the Rules Committee, but because this very same amendment has already been passed on the floor of this House by a 51-vote margin just a few weeks ago. On June 15, by a vote of 238 to 187, this body voted overwhelmingly for the exact same amendment, which would stop the FBI and other government agencies from going into our libraries and bookstores without probable cause. We voted on that by a 238 to 187 vote. And now a few weeks later, this provision is not included in the bill, and the Republican leadership has refused to allow the members to even vote on it. This, my friends, is an outrageous abuse of power and denies the majority of members here the right to put into the bill what they want. There is no excuse for that. If you wanted to speak against it, let it come up, argue against it. But it has passed once, it would likely pass again. But the Republican leadership has not allowed that issue to be debated. This whole discussion about the USA Patriot Act deals with two issues. Number one, every member of this body is pledged to do everything that he or she can to protect the American people from the horrendous scourge of terrorism. But some of us have more confidence in our law enforcement agencies and the American people than others do. We believe that we can fight terrorism, protect the American people without undermining the basic constitutional rights which make us a free country. Let all of us remember that in the 1940s, innocent Japanese Americans, without any pretext, were herded into internment camps. In the 1960s, a president of the United States had a file on him, President Kennedy, by the FBI. In the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr., who some of us consider to be one of the great heroes of the 20th century, was hounded and investigated by the FBI. The issue today is, how do we effectively fight terrorism, but do it in a way which protects the constitutional rights which make us a free country?
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I may point out to the gentleman that since his amendment passed on June the 15th, Great Britain has been attacked twice. So circumstances certainly change. I'll be glad to yield.
We understand what happened today. Tell me why you will not allow that amendment to come up for a vote, despite the fact that the majority of the members
reclaiming my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
I don't hear an answer.
Mr. Speaker, I might ask, how much time do I have remaining?
The gentleman has 1 minute and a half remaining.
I want to ask the gentlelady from New York if she has additional speakers.
May I inquire how much time I have?
Gentlelady has 4 minutes remaining.
I do have one additional speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to reserve the balance of my time for the purpose of closing.
Then I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Otter.
The gentleman from Idaho is recognized.
So we need that for this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the leadership that we're getting on this. This is a very difficult time for me because I've been a Republican all my life. And one of the things that I have fought for more than anything else is fairness. Do I always agree with one side or the other? Not always. And my entire political career, I have spent trying to just maintain balance. The interesting thing that was brought up earlier in the debate as I watched it from my office on this rule was that the very thing that the Patriot Act is supposed to give to this country, that the proponents of it says gives to this country, is being denied on this floor today. And it's being denied because I think people are afraid to be exposed to the truth. John Stuart Mill one time said, "In certain occasions there are people that are unfit for liberty. Let us not prove ourselves that because of temporary panic or momentary discouragement, or if it's a fit of enthusiasm for an individual, we are suddenly unworthy of our founding fathers' efforts in order to provide liberty to the folks first, not from the government, but from our birthright." And so I'm embarrassed to be on this side of the aisle from this aspect today. Certainly, I know that there's well-intended people on both sides, and I tried to work out a lot of things on both sides of this aisle on the Patriot Act. But I can tell you that with this rule and the lack of full and complete discussion, we have put a gag rule, the same gag rule that the FBI and the CIA and the NSA or any other government agent can put on the folks at the library or down at your local business and say, "I want all these records, but you're not allowed to use them." And so it's unfortunate that we've come to this.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Otter, may I give you 30 seconds more?
I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's recognized.
It's unfortunate that we've come to this at this time, at this moment, because we've done so much and we've got so many reasons to be proud. But this is a very embarrassing moment when we are afraid to confront the truth and the full and unabashed debate that a subject so dear to us as this deserves. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we have no other speakers, and I continue to reserve the balance of my time for the purpose of closing.
Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time either, and I would just like to take the remaining time to speak about the previous question.
Gentlelady is recognized.
If Mr. Gingrich is prepared to yield back.
The gentlelady is recognized.
All right. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask for a no vote on the previous question so that I can amend the rule and allow the House to consider the Sanders amendment that was rejected in the Rules Committee last night on a straight party line vote. And I might also add that Mr. Otter's extraordinarily important amendment on the egregious sneak and peek law was voted down on a 9-4 vote last evening. I ask unanimous consent to print the text of the amendment immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. This amendment would exclude booksellers and libraries from the scope of Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which allows law enforcement to conduct broad searches of the records of bookstores and libraries without demonstrating probable cause. And it forbids librarians and bookstore owners from even telling their patrons that their records had been searched. Mr. Speaker, an identical version of this amendment was passed in the House a month ago during consideration of Science, State, Justice, and Commerce Appropriations Bill. And by a substantial vote of 238 to 187, the members of the body expressed their support for the provisions of the Sanders Amendment. It's clear that the Patriot Act's provisions on the search of library and bookstore records are overly broad and undermine our basic constitutional rights. For the sake of civil liberties and the privacy rights of our fellow citizens, this House needs to debate the Sanders Amendment. I want to emphasize that a no vote will not stop the House from considering the Patriot reauthorization bill and will not block any amendment made in order under this rule. But a yes vote will block the House from considering the Sanders amendment, and please vote no on the previous question, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired.